Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read you an email, and I'm going to tell you the context of this email, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm reading you this email. And, the kind of confrontation immortalized in this email, and now share with you here on YouTube. I understand that it's part of the reason why today I have so few friends from my time doing humanitarian work in Laos and Cambodia in the past. I understand this is part of the reason why I have so few friends keeping me company today who I met in the hotels and hostels and guest houses of Thailand. Sometimes when I was physically moving in between doing humanitarian work and research projects in Laos and Cambodia. I understand that the side of my character I'm sharing with you right now, it's part of the reason why I've had so few friends in the vegan movement, why I have so few friends from my involvement in Buddhist scholarship, numerous other fields I've never been in. But that simplest test, that simplest question we're all supposed to ask ourselves, how would I feel if I were in your shoes? How would I feel if our positions were reversed? In conversations like this, believe it or not, I'm giving people exactly the kind of advice I wish I'd received myself. I'm showing people the kind of honesty and the kind of concern that I wish others had shown for me earlier in my life, or frankly, still now. I wrote an email to a guy, YouTuber here, called Vegan Foot Soldier. He said to me that I've falsely accused him of not reading any books. I'll go back and tell you what I actually said. And I'm digging too deep into an impromptu, unscripted, almost entirely unedited video that he made. So he's complaining that my response to his video is much too deep, given that what he said was impromptu, unscripted, and so on. And I reply, you realize that every single video you've seen on my channel in the last 4 years was impromptu, unscripted, and almost entirely unedited. A huge number are completely unedited. They're a single continuous take, including, of course, innumerable hours of live streams. When I speak unscripted, I say things of real substance because I'm a person of real substance. You aren't. You're fatuous. You're comfortable. Get uncomfortable. Do research. Hold yourself to a higher standard. You know that phrase, journalistic integrity? Have something better. Have intellectual integrity. That is the end of the email. And it's quite possible that's the last time I'm ever going to hear from that guy. Or it's possible it's the last time I'll hear from him this year. It's possible I'll hear from him again a few years further on down the road. Now, I had another conversation with someone today, a vegan activist who has a YouTube channel. And it was a much more lighthearted and collegial conversation than this. And it's possible that woman I had that conversation with, that she will be a friend of mine 5 years from now or 10 years. It's possible that's going to flow along in a relatively salubrious and cooperative way. But speaking of cooperation, I said to her, because this particular YouTuber has gotten involved in the political scene relatively recently compared to myself, I said, there was a time when there was a much more collegial and cooperative attitude here on YouTube. There was a time when people were just having so much fun coming on camera and sharing their lives that they felt as if we all just kept on having fun on YouTube together, sooner or later we'd change the world. And inevitably, here we are 5 years later, and that optimism has disappeared from the movement. But so that's all I said in that comment to her. But if you think about it on the individual scale and your relationship to your own parents, your own family, and maybe people you've known since high school or something, it may sound ridiculous to say that. But that's exactly what you're doing on YouTube, right? Like you're able to turn to your own parents and say, look, it's not just that I'm vegan, right? I have all these colleagues, I have all these friends, I have all these fans, I have all these supporters, right? And look at what a great time we're all having. The very thing that has abnormalized you within your family, the very thing that's made you feel like a reject, maybe within a circle of friends you've known since high school or some other community group like this, now instead it's a point of pride. Now instead it's something that's made you famous, even if that fame is on the smallest scale of just having a few hundred or a few thousand fans on YouTube, on social media, on the internet. I mean, I feel the pathos in that, as well as the egomania of people coming on and having a great time on YouTube and then feeling as if maybe finally my mom is going to become vegan, right? It was different before, when she saw me as the reject in the family, the person showing up for Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner or whatever kind of dinner you have in your culture, Kwanzaa. It was different when I was showing up at some occasion. I was the one person causing a problem for everyone else in the family, and they regarded that negatively. And maybe it was different when in the past, your idea of veganism and what you were showing to your mom was you standing by the side of the road holding a protest slogan on a cardboard sign, or maybe even getting yourself arrested or throwing cans of red paint on people wearing fur coats. And again, maybe you weren't doing that yourself. Maybe your situation, maybe it wasn't that your mom actually saw, photographs of you doing these kind of protests, but maybe those were the photographs she saw in the newspaper. And when you said that you were vegan, when you said that you cared about animal rights, in her mind, she thinks of you as one of those people with red paint, one of those people with slogans. And they're saying, no, look at me now. Look at me coming on YouTube, or look at me on Instagram, having so much fun and having all these followers, having this popularity, right? You see, it's not just egomania, right? There's also a kind of pathos there. In the full sense of the term, there is a pathetic grandeur to it. People who have a lot of friends make a lot of excuses. I don't have a lot of friends. I don't make a lot of excuses for the people in my life. And if our positions were reversed, I'd want them to treat me the same way myself. I don't want other people to make excuses for me. I don't want them to reinforce my bad habits or conceal my ignorance or my bad decisions. It may hurt, it may sting, it may just inconvenience you slightly to have someone point out that you're talking about something you haven't really read a single book about, that you really don't know what you're talking about. Whether they point that out to you through the most genteel Socratic method imaginable, or through the most abrupt and intimate reproach, the type of reproach only a close friend can get away with, right? Your friends can put you in check. Your friends can call you into question. Your friends can urge you to stop and reflect and question yourself. I expect and I hope for my friends to treat me exactly the same way I treat them. And if they did, I would value it so much. All right. I don't have a lot of friends because I don't make excuses for people. All right. And I live my own life in a very uncompromising way where I don't make excuses for myself. I've known this guy, Vegan Foot Soldier, for many years. And I'd given up speaking to him many years ago. But, I'm writing a book. This book began in the year 2020 when there were race riots in the streets of America, burning down whole city blocks, looting and pillaging, in the United States of America. And the book is now being finished in the year 2021. The book reflects a lot of research I've done. Some of it, honestly, some of it more than 20 years ago, but some of it recently, some of it just for the book, or some of it just in the months up to writing the book, and inexorably and inevitably, the book deals with America's unique politics of the double divide between European colonists and the indigenous people, and then between the European colonists and the descendants of African slaves. So, I was astonished to hear this British guy, vegan foot soldier, make a YouTube video in which he so crudely and so recklessly stumbled through the history of the segregation and desegregation of schools in the United States of America. When he talked about affirmative action, it's a uniquely American idiom. What does affirmative action mean if you're Japanese or from any other culture? He dealt with what could be simply called the long tail of the abolition of slavery in the United States of America. Because when Americans abolished slavery, they didn't pass a law saying that the bank has to give a loan to black people and white people equally. They didn't pass a law saying that a suburban property development corporation has to be willing to sell or rent a house to black people and white people equally. When they abolished slavery, all they did was transfer the slave economy to a sharecropping economy and leave all of the fundamental questions of how people would live together unanswered. They didn't answer the question of how black people would get education. They didn't answer the question of how black people would become doctors and dentists, and whether or not white people would have the right to refuse a black doctor just because he was black, or whether or not a school would be able to refuse a black medical student because he was black, and vice versa, whether or not black people were going to be able to exclude whites, whether or not you'd continue to pursue having two separate but unequal societies, or whether or not you would actually pursue integration of those societies, desegregation. Okay, so it's a history that means a lot to me, honestly, because of how it relates to other chapters of history. I'm not American. It's not my history. It's not. But I have literally sat down with well-intentioned Cambodian and Laotian people who thought that whites were the indigenous population of Australia and who were asking me how the black people got there. Right? I have had to explain our history in the sense of the British Empire. The British Empire includes Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand. I have had to explain our history of slavery and genocide to Laotian people, Cambodian people, Thai people, Chinese people. I've had those conversations with Chinese also. And you know what? I've come back to Canada and I've had to discuss it with Canadians who are often even worse off than the Laotians and Cambodians in their ignorance. The people of Southeast Asia, even though they were often so ignorant of geography that they literally thought the world wrapped around in such a way that Australia was adjacent to England, like playing the game Pac-Man. You can go off the screen on one end and pop on the other. They thought like, oh yeah, it's a real quick trip between Australia and England, right? That's why white people were the indigenous population of Australia. People at that level of ignorance, at least they didn't have the false sense of certainty that white Canadians had, and frankly, that white people from England had, in looking back at this history of slavery and genocide. Because most of these people, whether they're English, Canadian, or white Americans, the main thing they live with is the moral certainty that they did nothing wrong and they have nothing to apologize for. That is the primary fact. That's the primary conviction. And all the other facts are made to fit into place relative to I remember I had a white Australian guy, and it was very rare. I was staying at his apartment. That's my whole life. I don't know how many times. It's incredibly rare that I had a friend invite me to sleep at their apartment. It's incredibly rare. Like, it might be the only time I've slept at somebody else's apartment. I'm not getting childhood or something, as an adult. And that guy is not a friend of mine today. We now haven't talked in many years. We were friends then, and now we haven't been friends for many, many years. Maybe I was a little too honest. Remember, he was a white Australian. And in talking about this issue of Indigenous people and genocide and slavery, I remember he said, well, you know what my perspective is on it? I look at it this way. There was a war and we won. He was a very wealthy Australian. I know I'm not doing his accent justice, but he was actually from the social class in Australia who have an accent much closer to English than Australian. Forgive the poor accent work on this channel. I should definitely hire an intern to be my accent coach. That would really improve the quality of the broadcast. And I had the same conversation I had with him that I'd had with my boss at a particular job who was German. He was 100 years old. So he was connected. I mean, his mother had been a Nazi. He grew up in the shadow and the aftermath of World War II. I had this completely parallel conversation with this white Australian guy to what I had with this white German guy. I said, at the end of World War II, we won. What did we do to the Germans? Why did you treat the Indigenous people of Australia so much worse than the Nazis? When I had that conversation with my boss, as I say, was approximately 100 years old, exactly the same thing. But I was saying, why do you think we didn't commit genocide against you? And when you really get into it, what all of these people believe is that the victims of history deserved it, that they deserved to be victims, that whoever lost the war, that whoever got conquered deserved to be conquered. That's their worldview. And you can draw that out through Socratic dialogue. Anyway, Foot Soldier made this video. You've already heard his excuse that it was supposedly a very lighthearted, spontaneous video that he did in an unscripted way, unlike my videos, right? As if I wouldn't know a thing or two about doing unscripted, spontaneous, unedited videos about important political topics. And you know what really got to me? To hear this white British guy, and he's very wealthy. He basically identifies as a millionaire. He talks about his own financial status. To hear him running roughshod over those facts. And in our culture, we had a broken concept of humility. We had Christian humility. Christian humility makes no sense, and I'm completely happy to discard it and move on. Christian humility is of no interest to me. But we need to replace Christian humility with a much more dynamic, much more profound, much more meaningful notion of humility. There's a kind of humility that leads someone to pause before making a pronouncement about a subject they've never read a book about, that they've never even read a Wikipedia article about, that they have to maybe go and do some fact checking and reflecting about. It's a different kind of humility. I feel that that's holding yourself to a higher standard. That's holding yourself to a standard of intellectual accountability, credibility. When you turn on the news, you expect the person sitting in front of the camera to have made the effort to at least fact check, to at least reflect on, to at least consult a Wikipedia article, to have done some level of reading and background checking and research before making their pronouncements, before presenting you with their conclusions. And the broadcasters you see on television may fail to live up to this expectation you have. But I'm saying hold yourself to even higher expectations. That kind of humility. That's what I'm really interested in. So I wrote to this guy after watching his video. Vegan Foot Soldier. Title of the email is, what was the last book you actually read on any of these topics? Have you ever read a single book dealing with America's history of segregated education? Do you have any idea what the so-called libertarian and anarcho-capitalist talking points you're paraphrasing really mean? Think about how much or how little respect you'd have for another YouTube channel that weighed in on similarly tremendous political issues without doing any reading, without doing any research whatsoever. You have the time. You have the money. You can do better. Why is my video about the Central Park Five better than the videos by the Young Turks and 1,000 other YouTube channels? Because I did the reading. I actually read the police reports, etc. I can say the same thing about my video on Althea Bernstein. Nobody else read the actual police reports. I'll just pause to note, those are both examples of YouTube videos that are shadow banned on my channel. So when I search within my channel for the name Althea Bernstein, I can't get the link to that video. There were important, interesting videos I made that reflected hours of real research. Not days, not weeks. You know, some number of hours. Maybe about 2 days worth of work on each of those videos, 2 days each. I continue. This isn't about wit or charm or good intentions. It's about actively doing the research and then presenting an informed opinion. There is a book. You can buy it on Amazon. There's a 160-page book on the political history of modern Syria by David W. Lesh. Do you have what it takes to read a 160-page book and then make a YouTube video in response to it? Really think about what a reasonable standard that is to live up to. If you want to make a video presenting your so-called conclusion on racial segregation and integration in the United States of America, a solid 160 pages of reading might be a good start, especially considering that you have never lived with that political history and cultural context, i.e., you are much more alien to the United States of America than I am to Cambodia, even if you're united with it by a common language. And the last sentence of that email is, you are choosing to be stupid. It's a choice that you're making again and again and again. Something comes up every so often, frankly, just in conversations with my girlfriend. There's been this thing lately, coronavirus, face-to-face. I haven't had that many conversations with anyone else in the last year and a half. But, you know, this kind of discourse, I engage with other people. It doesn't come from a place of hopelessness. It doesn't come from a sense of resignation or frustration with people's stupidity. It's very much on the basis of hope and optimism. Why would I bother saying this to someone? It's because I think they can do better. Even the phrasing of that last sentence, like, you're choosing to be stupid. This is a choice that you're making again and again. I'm not saying that you are stupid in the same sense that a rock is either black or gray or marble. You know, like, It's not something immutable and unchanging on this earth, right? You choose to live the way stupid people live, so you think the way stupid people think, and you act the way stupid people act, and you talk the way stupid people talk. And the process becomes the product after so many years. Guess what? Now you are a stupid person, in effect. But yeah, I have a relentless sense of optimism that people can change, that people can improve. And the people who can't, people who are, so mentally disabled that they can't. And I've mentioned this a million times. I have one half brother who is so mentally disabled, he can't say a single word in any language. He can't speak English. He can't speak any second language. I've studied many languages. You probably know this about me. Well, guess what? Somebody who shares a whole lot of my DNA can't even say a single sentence in any language his whole life. He's that severely mentally retarded. There are people who are so mentally disabled that they can't improve, right? But then, I would never send someone like that this kind of email. I'd never reach out to them this way. There are probably some people watching this video now who used to be my friends and aren't anymore. Not that many of you, maybe 5, maybe 10. But you know what? I can think of a few people. I remember a certain filmmaker, a certain vegan filmmaker who was close friends with me on and off over the years, kind of close friends for one period. Then we didn't talk for a while. Then we started talking again a few years later. He stopped talking to me because I put a really honest review of his movie on YouTube. It's full of what I think of as really useful and constructive criticism. And I don't know, he might not be able to imagine that I would really value a friend of mine offering a critique, offering an analysis, offering a review of my movie, in the same way. I think it's possible there will be a few people watching this video now who were friends of mine in the past and stopped talking to me or blocked me or whatever because of some kind of really honest interchange of this. I'm telling you, you may not be able to perceive it as such. You may not have the detachment, what have you. But this is me reaching out to you positively. And if you think about the wording I used here, it's possible to respond positively also, if you have the humility to do it, right? The title of the email, what was the last book you actually read on this topic? You can have a constructive conversation about that. Maybe there is an answer. Maybe the person goes, oh, well, you know what? I just finished reading this one book, and I guess maybe it influenced me a lot, and that's why I said the things in the video. Oh, what's your perspective on that? Do you think I was leaning too far one way? You could have a productive conversation if you had read a book. You could also have a productive conversation if you could be honest about it. You really haven't read anything about it at all. You could have the humility to say, you know what? You're right. You know what? I guess really what I'm saying here really just does reflect something I'd vaguely heard other people talking about on the internet. What is the source? Whatever it is, when you reflect on it, where is this coming from? Right? You could reply by actually having a constructive and friendly conversation. And you could reply if you had it in you, if you had the humility to say, you know what? This is really harsh, but you're right. I did not do 160 pages of reading before making YouTube video on this. And guys, I've ordered a 160-page book about the political history of Syria in the mail. And there's a reason why I haven't been making YouTube videos talking about the politics of Syria. What was the video? I did one video about the politics of Chile in South America. That was so many hours of research, that video. If I put my name on it, if I sign my name to it, there's something to back it up. And I make mistakes. And sometimes I'm wrong. But I learn from my mistakes because they're mistakes being made in a process of active research, of sincere, open-minded learning. Right? Here's the reply from Vegan Foot Soldier. It was sent to me just 7 hours ago. You are unhinged and you are also wrong. Admittedly, strong opening. I don't feel there was anything unhinged in my emails, but all right. Not only do you falsely accuse me of having not read any books on relevant topics, you are digging too deep into an impromptu, unscripted, almost entirely unedited video that I made whilst running through a forest. LOL. Shall I do that? We're talking about genocide. We're talking about slavery. We're talking about things that really matter to people of substance. Foot soldier. All right. Glad you had a little laugh. All right. For some of us, this is political history we really live with. We really live with the consequences of this history of slavery and genocide every day. And some of us know just how little we can do to make it better because we've tried. You're rich. You're idle. Why don't you learn Cree? Why don't you learn Ojibwe? Why don't you do humanitarian work in Cambodia? Why don't you actually get out and prove the worth of your philosophy to address the problems African Americans have today in having access to education? To stick with this narrow example. I think there's an answer to that question, foot soldier. I think the answer is really built into the fact that you think this is a laughing matter. You think this is something for you to chortle about. If you cannot understand that, then there is no hope for you. FYI, in terms of capitalism, I've read Mies, Rothbard, Friedman, M. Friedman, Hoppe, Hayek, Hazlitt, and Sowell, mostly primary, but also secondary literature. This is a long paragraph. This is a long paragraph from someone who is not ashamed to cite Friedman, father and son, Marie Rothbard, and Hoppe, spelled H-O-P-P-E. Yeah, I correctly interpreted the problem with his implicitly racist rant when I said that what he was presenting were libertarian and anarcho-capitalist talking points. I asked, do you have any idea what the so-called libertarian and anarcho-capitalist talking points you're paraphrasing really mean? I still don't know if he realizes what they really mean. But what he's indicating here is that he has been precisely reading the kind of racist, right-wing, libertarian critique of the American history of education, meaning the critique of affirmative action, integration, busing, as it was called, attempts to get Black people equal access to education in a tremendously unequal social context. In terms of discrimination, slavery, and American history, etc., I'm a fan of Sowell, having just finished Wealth, Poverty, and Politics and International Perspective, which is part of a continuum of his writings, along with Race and Economics and Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Yeah, if you don't know who Sowell is, he is the darling of people who are not afraid to boast that they read Marie Rothbard. That's who Sowell is. I think it's Thomas Sowell. Sorry, I might be getting his first name wrong. Yeah. Another interesting read recently was D. Friedman's Legal Systems Very Different from Ours, which is also tangentially related to the video I made. Maybe also Enlightenment Now by Pinker. Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker, contributor to the so-called race and IQ debate. Yes, I'm seeing the rich tapestry of the intellectual sources you're working from here. And I notice you're not actually answering the questions that I put to you. And I understand they're challenging. I understand you may even find those questions insulting, but if he'd answered them, if he'd actually talked about what it is he's read, conversation could go a different way. Should I keep reading this list of books he's boasting of? I guess I've got to. I mean, fair is fair. On social contract theory, I've read Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau mostly through secondary literature, meaning he hasn't actually read Hobbes, Locke, or Rousseau. He's read what Murray Rothbard says about Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. Why front? Mostly through secondary literature. Yeah, have you read Buddhist philosophy? Well, I've read secondary literature. Well, then you haven't read Buddhist philosophy, okay? Anyway, I use a combination of Hobbesian and Hoppian grounding. Unironically shouting out Hop again, H-O-P-P-E. No shame in his game. In terms of meta-ethics and normative ethics, I can't believe, oh, Jesus Christ, 2021. What kind of dining establishment does he sit around at eating vegan caviar and swilling champagne and hanging around with people who in this way flagrantly cite Hobbes, Hoppe, and Immanuel Kant as the basis of their philosophy? I use a combination of... In terms of meta-ethics and normative ethics, I'm a neo-Kantian instrumentalist and have read extensive secondary literature on Kant. I should say Kant. Let's use the British pronunciation here. Expanding that out, I operate within a Wittgensteinian framework. I have read the PI as well as aesthetics, psychology, and religious belief, and a good amount of secondary literature on Wittgenstein. And that's just reeling off a bunch of books and thinkers I feel relate to that video I uploaded. Okay, so, all right. Do you feel any of these books are about the Black American experience? Do you think Wittgenstein's aesthetics are about the Black American experience? Are you aware that Immanuel Kant not only was racist, but basically invented a new type of racism that was incredibly influential through the British Empire? We'll get Kant's writing on so-called anthropology and so on. I'm sorry. Yes. Well, yes, you're being asked about the American history of desegregation, right? You're telling me you've read Kant and Wittgenstein and Hoppe and Murray Rothbard and Friedman, father and son. I asked you, do you realize what the real meaning is behind these right-wing libertarian talking points you're spouting out about education and affirmative action here? Maybe he realizes how close he's coming to the American white supremacist tradition, and maybe he doesn't. Maybe he has no idea what toys he's kind of playing with here. We're going to tell you. All right. I'm not sure what gives you the impression that I haven't read any books. I've generally read at least one book a month for the last 10 years. This is not as much as some people, and it's maybe not as much as you, but that's more than zero. You say you're not sure what gives me the impression that you haven't read any books, but that's exactly what I told you, right? I told you exactly what it is that when watching that video makes me feel shocked that you're coming out and making a statement on something you've never read 160 pages about. All right. And I know you might not care. I know it's not your history of slavery and genocide and racism and the failure of the education system to the same extent that it's my history. I know you haven't. I know. But when I'm talking about those same issues, whether it is in Cambodia or whether it is in India, some country, some distant culture, when we talk about unbelievable atrocities in the history of China here, we talk about all these things. Yeah, you know what? I have a commitment to a certain level of intellectual integrity. I care. I try to take those people's suffering and those people's tragedy and make it my own and speak from, frankly, our shared humanity. Okay. I talk about mass murder in Russia with more sensitivity than you talk about it in the United States of America, If you are such a powerhouse on economics and ethics, why don't you debate me on the topic? I'm guessing you won't because you would rather send me stupid emails telling me to never... Oh, we should lean into the British accent on stupid. I'm guessing you won't because you would rather send me stupid emails telling me to never talk to you again and then making 60-minute rants about me from the safety of your censored channel. Stupid emails. He asks, why don't you debate me on the topic? Question mark. All right, let's pretend we're dealing with someone who's, an intelligent person acting in good faith. You know why I wouldn't debate you on the topic? Because you haven't read 160 pages about it. Okay. You know what's a great topic for debate? Native American universities. Did you know that? Did you know that in America they still have a segregated education system for First Nations people, Indigenous people, Native American people? Google it right now. They got separate universities. Did you know that? Are they the best universities in the world? Have you ever been offered a scholarship to go to one of them? No. They're some of the worst universities in the world. They're some of the worst universities in the United States. Native American high schools, Native American universities. Now, I'm Canadian. It's easier for me to talk about Canada. Canada's separate education system for our Indigenous people. How do you think that's gone, foot soldier? How do you think that relates to our history of slavery and genocide? One of the reasons to talk about Native Americans that way is that jurisdictionally, it's so much more clear-cut than the experience of African Americans, Black Americans. With Black Americans, it's a different story in every state, in every town. The reality of what we now call redlining. Redlining is a very convenient term. It was great when it was invented. I remember before this term was used. There was one documentary, I think on PBS. No, it was the radio station, the left, NPR. There was a documentary on NPR in America, and that promoted this term. It's been totally obscure in the number for redlining. And before this, the incredibly complex and convoluted phenomenon of how Black people were denied access to housing, education, and everything else in the long decades between the formal end of slavery and the formal inauguration of equality. And we just had the first city in the United States of America pay reparations basically today. It was this week, it was just a couple of days ago. Yeah. So there's one city in Illinois, and at the municipal level, they did the research and they decided to pay reparations just for the racist and oppressive actions that the city government had done between 1921 and 1971, thereabouts, maybe 1968. Some of that is from memory. But they'd done repressive and terrible things to the African Americans there. And a scholar put together the list of all the things that today would be considered unconstitutional, immoral, and evil that the city government had done to its own Black people. And they put together a package and said, okay, we're going to commit to reparations. But, with Canada, the way we treated our Indigenous people was orchestrated at a federal level. That's broadly speaking true of the United States also. So it's easier to generalize about as one education system or one policy or one strategy even, But it's heartbreaking research to do. And it's heartbreaking to live with the knowledge that no debate on YouTube is going to make even the slightest difference in it. I referred to before the fact that in the recent past, there was this optimism amongst vegan activists that if we could all just come on camera and have fun or go to the beach and film ourselves running around the beach, that just the ebullient joy of the activists sharing their lives on YouTube, that this was going to change the world. Here in Canada, our Indigenous people just tore down the statue of Queen Victoria, tore down the statue of Captain Cook. There's no hope. There's no optimism. Tore down the statue of in front of that university in Toronto. God. Ryerson, old man Ryerson, his statue was torn down. And they started referring to it as University X instead of referring to it as Ryerson University until it can be renamed. You know, there's no hope. There's no hope for a better future, you know. And the cultural devastation of our native people, of our people of color, of the descendants of African slaves, you know, it has entailed the destruction of our culture too. Their poverty is our poverty. The fact that there is no such thing as Canadian culture, or even a Canadian cuisine or a Canadian restaurant, in the same way that there is such a thing as a Mexican restaurant even, reflects the extent to which the British Empire traded in genocide. And of course, the genocide was far more destructive for the indigenous people than it was for the colonizers. But in a significant measure, it has been destructive for us also. And that is why you can drive from coast to coast in this vast country and see nothing but one Walmart after another, one 7-Eleven after another, you know. The political failure, the institutional failure, the educational failure, and just the intellectual and cultural poverty of our lives as the colonizing white people in Canada, the United States, you know, compared to living in Poland. Okay. And I know the Polish take it for granted. I know they do, because I meet those people and talk to them after they migrate to Canada. And they say that they'd always imagined they'd have a better life in Canada, and then they get to Canada and they can't believe how bleak and hopeless it is. They can't believe that only now they realize what they had going for them in Poland that they thought was a hellhole. You know, I grew up around immigrants from Italy, from Korea. Korea is a great example. People who move from South Korea to Canada, and only after they get there, after years, they start to realize, whoa, you know, they move from a place, South Korea, where the indigenous people are Korean, and they were moving to a place where the indigenous people were exterminated. And what have you got here? Not even a second-rate imitation of European culture, you know, painted over the tombstones of our native people. And sure, it would be a long, more complex statement to say how, you know, the slavery of Africans fits into that process. That can't be quite so easily reduced to you know, a set of symbols on a chalkboard. All right, but you know, it's completely asymmetrical. It's completely unequal. It's completely horrifying. But sure, our devastation of them has devastated us as well. Our brutalization of them. It's left us with an empire that's not worth fighting for. It's left us with a constitution nobody believes in. It's left us with laws that nobody wants to uphold. There is nobody in Canada who feels proud of the statue of Queen Victoria that was just torn down, you know. And, you know, I know the other side of it too, in the same way that I can say I've talked to Italian immigrants who were expecting life in Canada. I've spoken to immigrants from India, Pakistan, so much of the world, who were expecting a better life in Canada and then were horrified when they didn't find it. The bitterest irony of all is to talk to our own indigenous people who lived in terrible conditions within this country, and they always assumed their lives would be so much better if only they could move to Toronto, if only they could study at the University of Toronto with the wealthy white people. And then they get there and they realize what an abysmally low level of education all the wealthy white people have. Like, they grew up in deprived circumstances, imagining that, you know, our culture in the affluent city was so much better off than theirs, and that our level of education, our level of enlightenment, and guess what? They went from one depressing, dead-end alcoholic culture to another. Guess what? You know, you move to Toronto and you're also surrounded by, you know, depressed alcoholics who have no culture and no sense of ambition and motivation and aspiration for a better life. You know, you are staring at the mirror image of your own destroyed indigenous culture. These are the people who destroyed it, and you start to figure out the extent to which the defects of the two cultures in one of us. Really brief, I want to get back to this, but you know, several times I spoke to First Nations people who complained to me that their own community was full of alcoholics, meaning reservation or otherwise, one of these towns that's 90% Native people. And what I would say back to them, a Socratic method, was, tell me about the nearest white town, you know, so down the highway is the next white people's settlement. And all the problems they were complaining about in their own community. I said, when you go to that white majority town or 100% white town just down the street, tell me, do you see the same problems? You know, I always give the example. I don't know if they still do this, but in the past in Canada, we had a blue container that would have the bottles going out for recycling. I said, you know, did you ever walk down the street looking at the recycling bins set out, and you see the extent to which all these houses are full of alcoholics? You know, you see all the empty bottles going in to be recycled. I know today that might not be the case, because they might return the bottles to get 25 cents. I guess that's something that might be a dated cultural reference. But, you know, to a remarkable extent, even though it's completely asymmetrical. But, you know, when you talk to the Native people who managed to make it in the city, you know, whether that's Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, people who got off the res and moved into the city, and then they're horrified in the same way that the people from India are horrified when they come here, and the people from Italy and even the people from Poland are horrified, right? You know, but of course there's a difference, because if you decided to give up Polish culture to assimilate into English-speaking Canadian culture, you know there still is this place called Poland where the language and culture continue, okay? There is no place on this earth you can go back to see Cree culture intact, to see Ojibwe culture intact. You know? So when you make that choice, when you assimilate, you know, you've lost the last shred of that culture, which is now being lost to the whole world. Okay. So read again my final message to Vegan Fossil here. You realize, I'm saying this after quoting back his excuse that I'm supposedly digging too deeply into what was an impromptu, unscripted, almost entirely unedited video. You realize that every single video you've seen on my channel in the last 4 years was impromptu, unscripted, and almost entirely unedited. A huge number are completely unedited. They're a single continuous take, including, of course, innumerable hours of live stream. When I speak unscripted, I say things of real substance, because I am a person of real substance. You aren't. You're fatuous. You're comfortable. Get uncomfortable. Do research. Hold yourself to a higher standard. You know that phrase, journalistic integrity? Have something better. Have intellectual integrity.